Today, I intend to do what no one has dared to do before. Definitively rank every format of debate. For those uninitiated with debate, there are a bunch of different formats that you can do, different types of debate. And as you would expect, they receive a lot of debate about which one is the best one. They all share the core of debate, which is generally a competition to decide whether one team on a motion is the correct one. So what are my qualifications to talk about debate? Well, that's a fair question. I grant you that. Well, I'm by no means an expert at every single one of these formats that I'm going to be talking about. I've lived in a lot of different places and debated a lot of different formats. So I've been exposed to a lot of different types of debate. And am I skilled at all of them? No. But do I have opinions about all of them? Yes, of course, I'm a debater. Now you may ask, Quinn, how could you possibly rank every single debate format? How could you have possibly even competed in every single debate format? And to that, I would say, how dare you question my debate knowledge? No, I'm not going to be ranking every single one of them. I'm just going to do the ones that I know about. I'm not going to do any extra research for this video. I've already put recording it off long enough. There's a bunch of obscure ones that I'm not going to be getting into. I'm just going to do the ones that I know because I'm assuming those are the most important ones. Finally, before we get into it, some terminology. Yes, you get homework. I know this is thrilling television. For those uninitiated with debate, proposition is what I call the team in a debate format that argues in favor of the resolution, and opposition is the team that argues against it. Some people will call the sides affirmative and negative, but they're just weird and we're going to ignore them. Proposition and opposition are the best ones. They shorten to prop and op. That means that they're the best names. Okay. The resolution is the declarative statement that teams will argue either is true and accurate or false and stupid. The ranking system I'll be using for these formats will be the ultimate tool of internet discourse, tried and tested, the tier list. I'm sure most viewers are familiar with how this works. Okay, let's get into this. First up, parliamentary. Good old parley. Now, this is probably the format that I've debated the most out of any type of debate, which means I'm a little bit biased towards it. Parliamentary is traditionally an impromptu format, meaning that debaters don't actually know what the motion or the resolution is going to be beforehand, and they have a limited amount of time, usually 15 minutes, to prepare a case for the debate. Parley sort of has a reputation, especially in the United States, for being a little bit ridiculous because of this impromptu-ness. But really, that's just because of the motions that they often give in parley and people just being inexperienced with debates. If you give actually good motions and not like stupid ones about, I don't know, school uniforms, then it actually gets interesting and really compelling and can be one of the most intellectually stimulating forms of debates. Pros, it's impromptu, which I like more. So it's not just subjective, though. I think impromptu is legitimately a more skill-intensive format of debate. You have to spend time preparing and knowing things ahead of time without actually knowing what you need to be studying for. You just have to have general world knowledge. And then not only that, but you also can't rely on like prep time to make your case good and find evidence and everything. You have to do everything on the spot and have logic already planned ahead of time. Second, the speaking structure makes sense. Speeches are just alternating back and forth between the two teams, except for one time where opposition goes twice so prop can finish. You also get to ask POIs, and POIs are probably the greatest invention that debate has ever come up with. POI stands for point of information, which means during someone else's speech, you can sit up and go POI, and they can either choose to accept or decline your POI. If they accept it, then you get to ask a question about what they were just saying. You get to like kind of point out some flaw in their logic or something like that with the points. And the best part of this is you get to be mean and passive aggressive, and it just feels amazing when you point out something that is a complete absence in their case and they have no way to respond. Also, in some formats of parliamentary, some debaters will do this thing where they kind of look like a teapot pose when they ask a question. It comes from original British parliamentary, where you would take your wig, you keep your wig on your head by holding the top of your head, and then you display your, I can't do it because I have a phone in my hands. You'd display your hand out to show that you don't have a weapon on you. So it creates a pose that's like, it looks ridiculous. Most people don't do it unless you're like really hardcore in parley, but it's also just funny and amusing, and I love it. Cons. Speeches are really short in impromptu rounds. Usually they're like 5 minutes. So each team speaks a very short amount of time, which means you don't get to actually develop the cases that much. Debates can get really repetitive easily, since you don't have as much time to flesh out a bunch of different arguments and new analysis and evidence to address. It can get into the kind of rut where you're talking about the same arguments over and over again between the two sides going, uh-huh, nuh-uh, uh-huh, nuh-uh, uh-huh, nuh-uh. And it just gets really boring, especially as a judge. Finally, some people, especially in the United States, will do this thing where they'll thank everyone in the room before they start a speech or during the beginning of the speech. So they'll be like, thank you for the audience for being here. Thank you for our opponents for being here. Thank you to the judge for judging this. And I just feel like I'm being sucked up to as a judge whenever they do it. Like they're kissing my ass and I hate it. Yeah, I guess that's more of just kind of personal thing. Still a con. But regardless of all of this, Parley gets a solid placement in A tier. Next up is British Parliamentary. With a name like British Parliamentary, you might think that this format is just like a slight variant of Parliamentary, and that's true in theory, but in practice it's actually quite a bit different. So like Parliamentary, it's traditionally impromptu and has POIs and everything, but unlike Parley, there's actually 4 teams in BP. There's 2 proposition teams and 2 opposition teams. What this means is the first prop and op team have their own debate where they each give 2 speeches. And then after they're finished, the second prop and op team have a second debate that builds off of the first one, but they have to bring in new analysis and new arguments, also addressing the ones from the previous debate separately. Sound confusing? It is. It's weird. I don't really get it. I think it is entertaining to watch, but I can't imagine debating it. I haven't personally ever actually debated it. The best part is that each one of the teams gets scored separately. So, for instance, like Proposition could win the debates, but that could be because of the first prop team's win. So first prop could be ranked first, and then it goes second op, third op, or second op, first op. Yeah, I told you this format's confusing. And then second prop. So Proposition had the best and the worst side in the round. And even though they won the debate, first op did better than the other prop team, which means that they get scored higher. Pros, it's super long. So compared to Parliamentary, you have a lot more time to develop your arguments, and it really gets into the meat. And then also because new teams have to bring on new arguments to be seen in a better light by the judge, it means that you're automatically going to bring in new arguments and make it not repetitive. POIs. Parley gets a point for POIs. Point. So BP does too. And then finally, there's a lot of added strategy from the presence of the 2 extra teams, because you have to think about how you want to build your arguments out so that your second team doesn't necessarily have as much space to try to make their own new arguments. And as the second team, you have to think about ahead of time what sort of arguments you're going to try to bring on that aren't necessarily going to be the ones that you immediately think of that the first prop or op team would bring on. Cons. It's super long. Sure, you can develop a lot into the case, but it also just takes forever to debate. It's also very complex and cerebral, so the learning curve on it is super high. And it's British. Ew. So BP goes in B tier for British. Moving on to Lincoln Douglas. So LOD is sort of a black sheep among debate formats. I don't really see it get that much attention, and it doesn't really exist outside of the United States, which kind of makes sense given the name. Like, it'd be weird to be in the UK and do a debate format based off of American presidential candidates. Unlike all of the other formats, the 2 teams only each have 1 debater on the team, like the famous Lincoln Douglas debate. Unlike the famous Lincoln Douglas debate, it doesn't last hours, though, thankfully. And LD is also unique in that it focuses a lot more on philosophical prompts and on principle-based arguments. So less about the concrete impacts and more about the arguing over morals and what is right or wrong. As of yet, I haven't abolished slavery with a Lincoln Douglas speech. Granted, Lincoln didn't really do that either, so I guess I shouldn't feel too bad. Pros. Not having a teammate can be really nice sometimes because you don't need to coordinate practices and work with anyone else and rely on anyone else. So you don't have to explain your thinking. You don't have to pass notes, which means you get to focus on what you're doing specifically. 2, philosophy is cool and it's interesting to debate about. Cons. There's a reason why debate is usually a team sport. It's a lot of work to put on a single person, and it's helpful to have another person to bounce ideas off of, especially during a debate. Secondly, the scope of LD is just a little narrow. I'd usually just rather have a debate that takes a philosophical turn and has a philosophical element to it rather than it being the sole focus of it. LD gets C tier. Moving on to public forum. Now, I don't care for public forum. It's always prepared and it places a really big emphasis on evidence. So you might be thinking to yourself, oh, evidence and debate, that sounds good to me. But if you are, you would be wrong. It's of course important to make sure that the statements you're saying are accurate and backed up with some amount of evidence. You have to have statistics and all of that. But public forum evidence is the actual arguments. Like, the arguments are the evidence. They also have this thing called cross-examination where the teams go back and forth asking questions to one another, and it's time that's shared between the two teams. So you have to be polite and give the other team time and cede time to them to be able to ask questions back and forth, and it's just a really weird dynamic that I don't enjoy. Pros. Sometimes you can ask really biting questions in a cross-examination that stump your opponents, and it's really satisfying. Secondly, the rebuttals don't have to be entirely based on examples, so you can use some amount of logic and reasoning and mechanization to disprove things. Cons. Actual debate and argumentation are kind of dropped in favor of just comparing evidence, which is despicable. And the order of speeches is kind of confusing because you've got the extra cross-examinations in there, so it doesn't alternate nicely between prop and op. It goes weird, and again, you're speaking at the same time as your opponents, which should just never happen in debates. Oh, also, the rebuttal speeches don't come immediately after constructive. So prop will do first constructive, then op will do first constructive, and op's first constructive doesn't have any rebuttals in it, which is super weird because you don't address the case immediately once it's presented to you. F tier. And so we have arrived at the format that made me want to create this video. Classic debate. So classic frustrates me because it's so close to being a good format, but it just isn't. It's a lot like public forum. There's no impromptu rounds, and rounds are very evidence-based. I've seen just far too many rounds of classic that devolve into pushing evidence back and forth between the two teams, and it's just comes down to a fist fight over whose sources are more reliable, and it makes me want to jump out of the window. I recently started coaching a team that does only classic debate, and I'm already so tired of it. Not the team, they're great. The format itself. Literally every single rebuttal has to come with supporting evidence or articles that it can be supported by. Otherwise, it's just thrown out by the other team. You literally can't do logic-based rebuttals. It has to have a piece of evidence. It has to have a card for it. And the worst part is what it does to the actual debaters. Because when you're used to only focusing on evidence, you forget and you never learn how to actually properly mechanize, do characterization, do impacts, any of the important things that most other debate formats teach you. However, the reason why I think classic is still a redeemable debate format is because it very strictly enforces excellent structuring in speeches. So everyone organizes their contentions into nice sets and subpoints, and every rebuttal speech is just clinical in the way that it examines the opponent's case. It goes point by point. And this is really, really easy to track and great as a judge because it's really easy to be able to watch where a debate goes. If you just removed all of the evidence requirements, it could be actually a really fun debate format. Pros. Cross-examination is fun because you get to catch your opponent out in their bad arguments. And like I said, organization is really good and speeches are easy to follow. Cons. All of the ranting I just did. Classic does not get C tier for classic. Classic gets D tier for debate. I guess all of them should get D tier then. I have to rethink this. Policy debates. I have a confession to make. I've never actually done policy debate before. I've only heard of policy and seen clips of it, but from what I can tell, it's kind of stupid. It's like a melding of debate and mock trial because you have like an acting and a role play element in it, which sounds cool in theory. Like I like mock trial and I like debates, but it's just comes down to being debate with extra steps. Pros, I don't know, acting. Cons, it has an identity crisis between debate and mock trial, and it needs to pick a lane. And secondly, the debaters create the motions. It's really weird. Like, you workshop a potential motion as proposition, and you go back and forth between the two teams. You also get assigned teams beforehand, which is also very odd. And then you go back and forth until you come up with something that both sides agree on to argue, and you're both happy with. And this is ridiculous. I don't want to have to make decisions about motions. I want someone else to choose it for me, and then I get to complain about the motion that someone else chose for me. Definitely goes in D tier. World school style. Okay, this is my personal favorite debate format. It's probably the most similar to parliamentary, but it sort of fixes all of the issues that I have with Parly. I might be suffering from sampling bias here too, because WSTC also has probably the best debaters, just point blank, that I've ever seen. So, of course, the format's going to sound really good. But I'd like to think that in a lot of ways the format transcends that. I'd like to think that, but do I actually? Pros. Nice long speeches. The first 3 speeches from each team are a whole 8 minutes long, so you get to do a lot more strong analysis. Each team has 28 total minutes to be able to prove their case, which is excellent. POIs are back, and you're encouraged to do them every 15 to 20 seconds. Is this annoying? Yes. Does it help with my super short attention span to be able to shout, "Point!" every 15 seconds? Also, yes. Thirdly, this format has some of the most dense motions you'll ever see. I've seen stuff from the Catholic Church in China to deep space asteroid mining. You're expected to know basically everything going on in the world because a lot of this is also impromptu. And for an insufferable current events nerd like me, it's just heaven. Cons, nothing. I love this format. It should be called WS tier DC. Okay, that's every debate format that I'm at least generally aware of. So this is the definitive ranking going forward for the entirety of the world. That's important for you to know. So if your favorite format got a bad ranking, I'm not sorry. You should have thought about that before you had wrong opinions. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe or something. I've got to go argue with people on the internet or something. Bye.